Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today, we're here to talk about the STOGA branded Pro Controller and Joycons for your Nintendo Switch. Now just before we get started, because you're probably asking yourself the question, no, this is not a sponsored video. However, the products were sent to me for free by STOGA. However, as I explained to them in an email, before deciding to see if I would recommend their products on a regular basis, I absolutely wanted to get the products in hand, test them out for at least a month, and do an honest video on what I thought of their products, what are the upsides, what are the downsides, without having to basically defer to talking points or any of their recommendations. And we'll address the main question. Yes, what hits you first about these controllers is they are going after the visual appeal of the Animal Crossing series by basically making their controllers look like the faces of those characters. However, what I was super happy to see once I received these controllers is this isn't just a question of visual appeal. Price for what you're getting for these controllers, I do think that we're getting a pretty serious offer here from STOGA. Now, just before we do a close-up on both this controller and the Joy-Cons and really go over their features, I did want to do a really quick enumeration of why I think it's such an amazing offer for the price. Now, let's start with the Pro Controller. Now, it normally sells between $32 to $38 depending on the specials and the time, so let's just call it a $35 controller. Now, in a $35 controller, you are actually getting, number one, it charges with USB-C. So it's compatible with the charger already from your Nintendo Switch. You do not need to carry around a second cable for charging it. However, there is a USB-C cable included in the box, so that is not an issue. But on top of that, there is a vibration function, there is 6-axis control, and there is even NFC compatibility. That is super rare for a non-first-party controller, but this controller actually reads amiibos. And on top of it, you add a turbo functionality, something that the real Pro Controller doesn't have, and we'll get to that a little bit later because especially if you're an Animal Crossing fan, that is a feature you're going to want to look for on your controllers. Now, if we move quickly over to the Joy-Cons, these are more a $45 price mark, but what I love about these is that they work the same way as a normal Nintendo Joy-Con, and it has all the same functions as we just saw on the Pro Controller, minus the NFC. However, instead, what you do get is you do get 2 programmable buttons at the back, sort of like we see on the Hori Split Pad Pro. And to probably answer right away a few questions, they work both wirelessly and when connected to the Switch, and also, as you can see here, connected to their central unit as a regular Pro Controller. So I hope you can see why I'm saying that value-wise in the market, both these products have a very decent offering. However, before we move on to close-up, I want to touch on one last subject. I am not going to say, however, that these are the best all-around controllers for someone who is into the competitive gaming scene. Like if you're speedrunning, if you're playing a lot of FPS games, and you need the absolute best controller for those situations, there are obviously more expensive and better options out there. However, I do find that for someone who is a casual gamer looking for the best price to quality offering, there should be some serious consideration for these controllers. So now let's move on to the close-up to these controllers. And don't forget, as you're watching the video, if you do like the content, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you aren't already. Now, I wanted to start with the Pro Controller because this is so feature-packed. It actually has all the features of the standard Pro Controller. The only thing is that this is normal rumble. This is the patented Nintendo HD rumble. However, the reason I have the standard Nintendo Pro Controller in shot here is just to show you the size difference of the two controllers. This one is significantly smaller than the official Pro Controller, and this is an official one. It's just been reshelled, so don't be confused by that. So as you can see, if we put them down side by side, this new controller is actually quite a bit smaller than the official Pro Controller. Let's get this out of shot because it was just really for a size comparison between the two that I had this year. Now, what that size difference actually means is that this controller is really good for someone with small to medium-sized hands. If you have slightly larger hands, you might be slightly less comfortable than the official Pro Controller, especially on the trigger buttons at the top, where as you can see my fingers, rather than hitting the tip of my finger like the Pro Controller, I'm sort of having to lay it on top of these triggers. However, what is nice to report is that because of the extremely rounded design, the joysticks and D-pad do fall to a comfortable position, however. Now, I'm happy to report that pretty much all the buttons are very responsive on the controller and work very well. They have some nice feelings to them, and the joysticks are very responsive. The D-pad is not my favorite, and I would have liked it to be a little bit more raised up and not as squishy, but it is still fully functional. And my biggest fear were the triggers at the top because of their outworldly designs, but I've got to say that they are actually quite responsive and they do feel quite good. However, there is a downside. For both the joysticks and the buttons, they did choose to go with these slightly smaller, almost Joy-Con sized buttons. Now what that means is that for FPS games, you'll have a slightly lower level of controls because of the smaller joysticks, and also these smaller buttons, although they are nonetheless comfortable, for games that you have to do a lot of mashing, they are really not going to be the best thing. Now you do have the turbo function that can sort of help you out with that, but nonetheless, if we're talking about just button performance, I would have preferred to see slightly larger buttons, but I get for the overall visual aesthetic why they went with the smaller version. Now the same thing for the top triggers. Although I said they were more responsive than I was expecting and they are overall very good, the overall design here of having this little lip will make it odd for games that you have to mash a lot on the top triggers. But as I said earlier, for a casual gaming public, this is going to turn out to be, in my opinion, an excellent controller, especially at the price they're offering it for, which is only $35. And what I wasn't expecting is these little paw marks at the bottom are not only aesthetics add-ons, they actually add a little level of grip and are comfortable for your palm. So now let's move on to the Joy-Cons. Now the Joy-Cons are sort of the opposite of the Pro Controller. I would say that these Joy-Cons are actually excellent for someone who's looking for an upgrade comfort-wise to the official Nintendo ones. Number one, if you play with them like this in the dog face controller mode, having the offset angle design is way more comfortable. Secondly, this also offers the same turbo compatibility as the Pro Controller we looked at earlier, meaning that for some games it is actually be a huge leg up. And on top of it, as I pointed to earlier, having a D-pad for someone who wants some serious 2D platform gaming is going to be way better than the separate 4 buttons. And the kicker is that it actually offers programmable buttons at the back. That was a huge surprise and honestly something that should have been integrated to the normal Joy-Cons a long time ago. Plus, this handle-like design is so much more comfortable when you're playing in handheld mode. We're going to look at it on the Switch in just a couple of seconds, but this is a huge improvement. Now, one last little thing I wanted to show you before we actually connect it to the Switch itself is there's actually a liftable cover here at the front where you can fit in an extra micro SD card and even 2 extra cartridges, which is just nice if you're going on the go and you just want to carry around this with you. It actually just adds an extra functionality to this center part that the real Nintendo one doesn't have. Now, as I pointed to earlier, once it's on the Switch, what is really nice about this Joy-Cons is that they're recognized by the Switch as actual Joy-Cons. And synchronize them is as easy as slotting them in and they'll synchronize automatically with your Switch, just like official Nintendo ones. Now, I'm also super happy to report that although there are USB charging ports on each one of the Joy-Cons, and I was scared that maybe at first you had to charge them separate from the central console, as I said earlier, they show up as regular Joy-Cons on the console, and I can confirm with 100% certitude that they charge directly with the console at the same time, so you never actually need to use those charging ports. I'm also super happy to report that they work fine wirelessly, just like real Joy-Cons. You can use them for games like Just Dance, no problem. And you can even share them with a second player in sideward controls, just like so. However, here comes the only true disadvantage. Obviously, the form factor is less comfortable because of the elongated part of the controller. And also, whoever winds up with the left side Joy-Con will have the D-pad rather than the 4 separate buttons. It does work, but it is far less comfortable than the official Joy-Cons in that one and only situation. So contrary to the Pro Controller, I do think that these Joy-Cons are a significant upgrade for anyone who plays in one-player mode and wants a more comfortable overall experience. Now, contrary to the Pro Controller earlier, I do think that overall the Joy-Cons here do give a better overall experience than the official Nintendo Joy-Cons for someone who plays primarily in handheld mode and in single player mode. So now that we know the ups and downs on both the controller and the Joy-Cons, final thoughts on each and who are they actually good for. Now let's start with the Pro Controller. Now I do think that this is an excellent controller for a casual gamer that wants the best price for quality offering, but that nonetheless has all the features of the Pro Controller, minus a regular rumble rather than the HD rumble. Who would I say this controller might not be good for? Well, if you are a competitive gamer, whether it be online with FPS games, or simply that you play very difficult platformers that require a lot of button mashing, this is probably not going to be ergonomically the best controller overall for those games. So obviously, if you don't mind paying the extra premium to have that extra performance from your controller, well then obviously this one will probably not be the best option for you. Then you're better off just getting an SN30 Pro 2, the actual Pro Controller from Nintendo, or other options out there. And I'll say it right now, if your main game is Animal Crossing, and that's where you spend almost all of your time, these two controllers, either the Joy-Cons or this Pro Controller, is an excellent option for that. And if you've never used the turbo function before to either gather fruit, cut down trees, or do any of the repetitive tasks in Animal Crossing, that is a game changer for that game. You don't know how awesome it is to just have to hold down a button and run through a field picking up all the fruit in a straight line, rather than basically having to mash the button and you always know you're going to miss a fruit here and there. Now, if we move on to the Joy-Cons themselves, this time I think this is a better all-arounder for a lot of people. Basically, if you play in handheld mode, these Joy-Cons, as you saw earlier in the video, are way more comfortable to hold than the official ones from Nintendo. And the only real functionality you're losing is the NFC. So if you can deal with that as a gamer, I do think that overall, these are almost better than the Nintendo ones themselves for a lot of gaming purposes. Number one, the ergonomics are way more comfortable, and secondly, the fact that you have a D-pad. Also, someone who just plays games like Just Dance and just needs a couple of extra Joy-Cons for those third and fourth players, this is a way cheaper option than actually buying official Joy-Cons from Nintendo. The only situation where I can say that these are significantly weaker than the official Nintendo Joy-Con controllers is someone who plays a lot in two-player mode with the controllers turned sideways. Because as I said earlier, they are a lot less comfortable to hold. And for whoever winds up with the left Joy-Con, playing with the D-pad instead of 4 separate buttons in that situation is a significant disadvantage. It still works, it's just a significant downside to the official Nintendo Joy-Con controllers. So overall, those were my final thoughts on the STOGA Pro Controller and Joy-Cons. Now, if you're looking at picking up any of these products, I'm going to be leaving my Amazon affiliate links down below in the description of the video, as well as the official STOGA website. I'd also like to hear from any of you that maybe already have these controllers and Joy-Cons. Do you agree with my findings on them, or maybe are there some things I missed about them? And lastly, don't forget on the way out to hit the like button if you like this content, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you know when all my future videos come out. And as usual, I hope I'll see all of you in my next video.